Now, President Vladimir Putin is beginning a two-day visit to India today, seeking to deepen defence ties, even as New Delhi faces growing US pressure to stop buying Russian oil. The Russian leader making his first trip to India since the start of the Ukraine war. New Delhi trying to maintain decades-old ties to Russia, dating back to its independence, without pushing, of course, Washington or Europe away at a time of strained relations. Well, we're going to discuss all of that with our international affairs commentator, Doug Herbert. Doug, first of all, who gets most out of this summit?
If I have to get off the fence, I'd say Russia is. Look, for Vladimir Putin, what is this visit about? It's basically a giant message that he is sending to the rest of the world, but especially to Europe and the United States. Look at how unisolated I am. Look at how little of an outcast, how little of a pariah Russia actually is. It's me, not you, who is right now at the center of this new geopolitical emerging world order, this multipolar world. Not the U.S., not Europe. Europe is the isolated one. Europe has failed. That said, the reason I think Russia's getting more out of it is look at the circumstances, euphemism if ever there was one. Russia right now, it's the fourth year of an unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine, desperately needing funding for that war, coming, a month or so after the United States, in a signal move, slapped stiff sanctions against Russia's two biggest oil giants, Rosneft, Lukoil, who contributed at one point, a large, sizable chunk of Russia's budget revenues. In that context, he is coming to India, which what has India done for Putin? Well, India has been upping and buying large volumes of that oil that Putin has not been able to sell to almost anyone else in the world, save for China and a few other smaller customers. So India, in that sense, is a giant market for the Russian oil, a necessary market. And just to give you a sense of how necessary, before Russia's invasion, full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the imports, Russian imports to India were about 2.5% of India's imports were from Russia. Since then, it has spiked because of the discounted price of oil that Russia has sold to India at. It has gone up to about 35%. So 2.5% before the war, 35% of India's oil imports now from Russia, a third of them. That is giant. Now, they've gone down. India last month really bought almost no oil from Russia after those sanctions were adjusted, but they will find ways to ramp those up again. Plus, you mentioned energy, defense deals. There are a lot of those right now. Look, India is a market of 1.4 billion people. It has a giant, fast-growing economy, about 8% right now. Those are not statistics you can sneeze at. If you're Vladimir Putin up against in a geopolitical corner right now, with a war in Ukraine, talks on that war, and being considered a pariah by much of the Western world, India is a giant geopolitical partner. You need it more than ever.
Let's put the relationship between these countries into context as well, Doug. I mean, it's a relationship that's really stood the test of time, isn't it? Survived the Cold War, remained resilient ever since.
Yeah, absolutely. It's decades long, right? It's funny because Russia today, RT, the propaganda news outlet in Russia, is launching in India right now, and ahead of Putin's visit. There are these billboards right now on the streets of New Delhi and elsewhere basically saying this dialogue began decades ago. We're just turning the volume up. And it's interesting because that marketing slogan that RT is using to launch in India applies perfectly to the Indian-Russian and before that Indian-Soviet relationship. You said it goes back to the Cold War. You're right, Stuart. It goes back 70 years ago, 1955. Khrushchev and his top deputy, Bulganin, actually spent, in that year, 19 days. They traveled to India, two separate trips, total of 19 days, to show how far back it went. The Soviet Union at the time, geopolitical, really stood in India's corner, had India's back in its war against Pakistan in the 70s. It also was just there diplomatically at a time when the U.S. was sort of supporting Pakistan. The defense cooperation has been ramped up in this era right now, and right now the Indians are looking perhaps to buy some big Soviet air defense systems, some fighter jets, all of this part of a long, ongoing natural affinity between these two countries.
What about Donald Trump? Watching things closely, briefly?
Very closely. Donald Trump wants to see right now whether first of all, the foreign policy pressures on whether India is going to basically listen to the United States when Donald Trump says, stop buying Russian oil. So far, India has had walked that diplomatic tightrope. It has not stopped buying Russian oil, but it is sensitive to the U.S., and it's right now negotiating with the U.S. several deals, including deals to buy liquefied natural gas, petroleum gas from the United States. Also, some jet engine deals right now in the inking between India and the U.S. So India wants to keep the trade relationship with the U.S., doesn't want to abandon, doesn't want to sacrifice that relationship, even as it tries to keep Moscow on side. Don't try that at home, Stuart. It's a very difficult balancing act.
Doug, thanks very much. Doug Herbert, our international affairs commentator here on France 24.